All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors China webinar series on what you need to know about investing in the Chinese market. The whole purpose of this week's webinar series is to look in depth on what is required or what decisions investors have to make when incorporating an entity in China. So on day one, we were looking at how to actually set up a company. What are the types of legal entities? What is the right business activity and how that might relate to the Chinese name that you're creating for your company. And yesterday we looked at two items that are required to be input as well when you're setting up a company, which is the registered capital and the total investment, and how to get to those figures when you are creating your budget. And today we're going to be talking about location. So one of the items that you do have to insert when you are registering your company is a registered office address. And we are going to be focusing today on the legal and tax consequences around choosing that registered office address, which relates to the district, in the city, in the province of where you want to operate your business. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about shareholders and appointing individuals within that entity. And then on Friday, we'll be talking about opening that bank account. So let's get started. Now, everyone that's on here today has been here this week, so I'm going to skip this slide. But if there happens to be someone I'm not familiar with, please do let me know whether you're a newbie, a startup, or an experienced China hand. It's always good to know a little bit the background of the people that are on today. But more importantly, what I do want to highlight are some technical things because my Wi-Fi is definitely not great today. So I have a feeling I might not be stable, and I apologize for that up front. But just so you're aware, if I do get kicked off at any point, it usually takes about 30 seconds to 1 minute for me to reboot the system, to reboot my Wi-Fi, and then the GoToWebinar system. So if you have that ability to stay on, please do stay on. Apologies up front. Right now it all looks a-okay, but I'm a little bit nervous. So I am saying that because I had issues already this morning. But having said that, I will come back on. I will finish today's session, and today's session is being recorded. If something happens to you, unfortunately, I can't help you because I am focused on presenting today's session and obviously focusing on making sure that I remain within the Wi-Fi system. But the whole point of today's session is obviously, and I want to reiterate this, is that I am educating you about registered office addresses and how to make your decision on choosing a location in China. I love having the Q&As. The feedback I've gotten so far in these webinars has been on the Q&As and the interactiveness. So please, I do challenge and motivate you all to interact with me in today's session, okay? So ask your questions, make your comments, and please do interact. So what are we covering today? Well, I'm going to be going through the importance of having a real estate agent and what the objectives of that real estate agent are. One thing I did miss out on was also potentially having a lawyer on board. Because this will probably be the first area where you get into contracts and contract negotiations. It is important to also understand where is the right location for you and your business. So doing a location analysis and figuring out what your key considerations are vital, because I will then be moving on to the legal and tax consequences of your registered office address and what it actually means when it comes down to operating. And last but not least, I will be highlighting an action plan list for you all, which hopefully will be your takeaways for today. So who am I? Just to repeat, apologies, but this does go up on my YouTube channel, and sometimes people don't watch every single session, so I do have to repeat myself. But who am I? How can I help you? My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory and Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. And I have been in the Chinese corporate services and compliance sector for the last 17 years. My focus for the last 17 years has been inbound investment into China. And I have worked with over 500 companies, international companies, with their pre-investment advisory strategy, their market entry strategies, then their implementations, and then finally their growth strategies in the market. And I'm also the creator of the China Roadmap Method. And the China Roadmap Method is a 3-milestone, 9 superpower bullet point journey that I put my clients on in terms of how to really build a performance business in China, and how to also protect one's business in China. So if you want to join the China Roadmap Method webinar, I am hosting it on November 10th, which is next Tuesday. And the link can be found here, but you can also find it on our website, which is woodburnglobal.com/event. So to start today's presentation, we are going to be looking at when you are setting up a company in China, before you even start with the name approval process, which obviously leads to a vicious cycle, you need to sign a lease agreement for a registered office address. And the purpose of today's session is to define to you what is a registered office address and where people make mistakes on this, okay? To be quite frank, this presentation today, which actually has the least amount of registrants, is the most vital presentation I'm going to give in this week, because it is where companies spend the most money on fixing their organizations at a later stage. And hopefully by end of today's session, you'll understand why. So tip number 1, when you are looking for a registered office address, you do need to partner with a real estate agent in China. Now, I was actually on a phone call with a company yesterday that's looking to set up in Shenzhen, and they have been they're based in Hong Kong even, but because of the border controls and the quarantine issues, they've actually put themselves on a 2-month hold because they want to find an actual office space. And looking through videos or going online, just looking at photos, they don't feel confident in making a decision. They physically want to go to China in terms of actually setting up. An alternative solution for companies that are in that situation is to start yourselves off in a business center to at least get the registration up and running, okay? But the key thing is getting yourselves in touch with a real estate agent to know what availabilities there are and to also help you negotiate the deal, all right? That's the most critical. Now, I've listed here 10 key points when choosing a location, but for some of you, depending the sector or the industry you're in, you'll probably have other key considerations, okay? The first for me, which is really now more and more of an issue, is the style of operation. And I say this because most of my clients nowadays are in the service sector. And for many of them, they want to be in a hip location, like a WeWork type location, a co-working space type of location. Others, however, want to have their independence and they want to be in their own office space. So you have to first analyze that aspect. You got to look at the demographics of the location you're choosing, okay? Are you going to be able to find employees, suitable employees that have the skill sets that you're looking for, okay? What is the foot traffic? And obviously that relates more to retail. I can give you a case study on that where I helped a Italian gelato company set up their first shop in Shanghai, actually. This was really back in the day. And they chose a mall, but instead of being on the ground floor of the mall where you would expect all of these little gelateria shops to be, they were on the 3rd floor. They weren't getting any foot traffic whatsoever, right? You got to think about accessibility and parking, metro stops, bus stops. Look at the competition. Are they nearby? What is the proximity to other businesses and services? I mean, I remember with my one of my locations, when I first moved into that area, there were 0 restaurants. I was going every lunch to a Kedi, which is like a 7-Eleven, to get my little Chinese lunch box. you've got to, depending again on the sector that you're in, think about the amenities that are around your location and what other businesses and bank branches are. And I'll touch on that on Fridays, that are walking distance from your office. Image is always an issue. I mean, if you look at law firms, accounting firms, you know, these high-end service-oriented companies, you'll always find us in the CBD areas, right in the middle of town, right? So think about image, history, etc. Regulations are a key thing. So, you know, do you want to be in an economic zone that has preferential policies for your industry and sector? Are you being pushed to go into a zone because of the clients that you are cooperating with? Are you being pushed into a city because of the grants and subsidies that you have applied for, forcing you to set up an entity then in that city? All of these types of regulations have to be considered. If you are in a prohibited and restricted sector, does that mean you have to be in one of these free trade zones, right? If you're going into cross-border e-commerce and you're not planning on setting up an entity in China, you know, then that means actually you're restricted to the bonded zones. You've got to look at the building's infrastructure, particularly if you need warehouse facilities, and then obviously look at the utilities and other costs. Like I said, very brief 10 key considerations that for me were very important when I was looking for space and have become very important for my clients, depending again on the sector and industry that they're in. Now, the key thing that I want to say is China is enormous. It's enormous. So we, and I'm going to use Woodburn as an example because it just makes it a lot easier. We chose Shanghai. Having said that, majority of my clients are not in Shanghai. Okay, majority of my clients are actually spread throughout the country, all the way from Guangzhou, Shenzhen, all the way up to Beijing, Tianjin, all the way to places like Wuxi, Wuhan, Hangzhou, Chengdu, Chongqing. I mean, it's spread throughout Hohhot. I even have a client in Inner Mongolia. I mean, it's really, they're spread throughout. So how did we make that decision on Shanghai? First of all, that's where I wanted to live. So that was number one. There was no other Chinese city that I actually wanted to relocate to. So if you are sending an expatriate, take that into consideration, because you might find that if they don't like the city where you're choosing, you're going to have high turnovers of expatriates. The second was that my perspective was, if I have to fly out to clients, Shanghai is quite central. So going up to Beijing is about 2.5 hours. Going down to Shenzhen or even Hong Kong is 2.5 hours. If I want to go west, you know, it's a pretty centralized main city. Downside to it, it's extremely expensive. So the skilled employees that I'm hiring, the accountants, CPAs that I'm hiring, are much more expensive than if I would have located in Beijing, or even if I would have located in Shenzhen. But I had to make that balance and make that analysis, okay? So really do a location analysis. And one thing that I want to highlight that a lot of people don't know about is that this is one of the main functions of a real estate agent, is to do these types of location analyses for you. They call them location studies. And they will look, particularly if you are in the production, manufacturing, sometimes even trade side of things, they will evaluate for you what would be preferential policies, where you would get certain facilities like gas or energy resources, where there would be a pool of blue collar workers. You know, they do these types of studies, okay? So think about using that, because again, I want to reemphasize here, and apologies for my language, it is a pain in the ass to change your location once you've made a decision on a location, okay? You will be spending a lot of money on this. And again, I'll explain why. Now, I just took this example. Apologies, the photo is really bad. I just took it off of Google. But what I wanted to highlight here was, this is Starbucks's flagship store in Shanghai. Okay, and unfortunately I didn't put photos of the interior, which is amazing. This is located in the center of Shanghai's CBD on the Puxi side. It is on the Champs-Élysées type road of Shanghai. The foot traffic is enormous because not only do you have residential buildings, but you also have a lot of the office commercial buildings surround it. It is always packed. And I actually use that a lot for very early meetings when I'm trying to meet someone between 7, 8, 8:30 a.m. That's when it's empty, and it's beautiful to be in there to have a meeting. But Starbucks invested in this heritage building with the location, invested in the decoration because they knew they were going to get the foot traffic and the people coming to just simply have a cup of coffee and admire the building. And that was their analysis. That was their location analysis on this. And trust me, they spent a lot of money on it, but they're getting their return on investment as well. Okay, so it is very critical to figure out what is the best location for you. And obviously I'm using retail here as an example. And actually that was one of the questions that came up in the registration form. But it is something to consider even when you're looking at the commercial side of things. So please, please, please research the right location. Tip number 2 is either partnering with, again, a local market entry advisor, or additionally with a Chinese lawyer who will help you to negotiate the contract, the lease agreement between yourselves and the landlord. Okay, because what you don't want to get into is a situation that I got myself into, where I started up in China in a business center, and because it was in an A-grade building, at that point in time, it was 2000, I believe 2006, 2007, real estate prices just skyrocketed, and the landlord of the business center had increased the business center's rent by over 50%. And as a consequence, literally from one month to the next month, the business center passed on that increase to all of its tenants. And a decision had to be made by all the tenants whether they were going to move out or remain. And we made an executive decision very, very quickly at that point in time to exit. And I had 30 days to do that. It was a nightmare because for 30 days, all I was focusing on was not my business, but was on the location. And I had to find a new one. And the advantage for us was that I was there on the ground. You might not be, and you might not have a management team readily available to make those type of decisions and make those changes. And obviously now with COVID and cross-border border control issues, it will be more and more difficult. So you really want to find the right location from the beginning. So let's look at the legal consequences of selecting your location in China, okay? So first of all, when you are registering a company in China, you must register a registered office address. And that is the first step to doing anything in the application process, meaning you need to have the exact address and have the lease agreement available. And this is for any type of company registration. So for any type of legal entity, rep office, limited liability company, joint venture, whatever you can consider those types of legal entities. And it must be your operational office as well. And this is where people are not paying attention. And this is where you can get in trouble. Virtual office addresses are illegal in China. In January of 2020, a client that I had not set up were referred to a virtual office address to speed up the application process of their company establishment. When I took over the company, we do just naturally a health check to understand the full background so that myself and my team are aware of any issues. And the biggest issue that we found was that there was no lease agreement because they set up in Putuo district in Shanghai, and the lawyer had a connection with the Putuo government, and a deal was made to provide a office address, but with no attaching agreement or payment situation, nothing. It was just all verbal handshakes. So they used that for the company registration. It worked. But down the line, I believe it was 16 months down the line from the point of when the business license was issued, the bank of the company, and they used China Merchants Bank, discovered that the address had not been updated, that there was no lease agreement, and that it was a virtual office, and they froze the account because for them, that was a sign through their KYC process, their Know Your Client process, that the company was not in a good standing. It took 3 months to reactivate that account because it took 3 months for the company to find a new location in Putuo district so as to not cause any issues with the tax office, to sign the lease agreement, to then go through the process of changing the registered office address, and then finally giving the updated business license to the bank. 3 months where they could not access their accounts. Money could come in. I mean, they could issue invoices to their clients, but they had no room to access the bank account to make payments, meaning salaries were not paid, disbursements of staff were not paid, nothing was able to go out, couldn't pay suppliers. Okay, so be very wary of this. Another issue with virtual office addresses is random government inspections, which are happening more and more often. Where will the government go to inspect? They will go to the designated registered office address that is on your business scope. On your business license. If they find that there is nobody in that space, and actually it's again a virtual office, which is illegal, they will figure out where is your operational office. And as they did to a client of mine in Shenzhen, they will padlock, they will kick everyone out and padlock that office until you have updated your business license to indicate that the operational office is where it says it should be. Okay, they padlocked it, nobody could go in. All right, and obviously you don't want to cut off that padlock since that is a government padlock. Okay, you don't want to get yourselves in trouble. So please, please, please remember that an operational, your registered office address should be where your operational activity is being performed, where your employees are going to be based. Now, I interestingly enough have a client in Shenzhen who, through discussions with a bank, was referred to set up in Shanghai, which has preferential tax policies. When they reached out to the Shanghai Promotional Bureau, the Shanghai Promotional Bureau said, and can I just emphasize here, it's a promotional bureau. It's not the government bureau, it's a promotional bureau. They said, set up your registered office address here so you can benefit from the preferential tax policies. And then you can set up your operational office wherever you like in Shenzhen. What they didn't say was, if you do that, then you have to set up a branch, a legal branch of that Shanghai company in that operational office space. So that means 2 registrations have to happen. One for the limited, and then after once the limited is set up, the branch that would just be in a second location. Okay, there are maintenance requirements, corporate compliance requirements for both those entities then, on an accounting perspective, on a tax perspective, so you have to be aware of this, okay? In addition to that, when you are signing that lease, it has to be at least for 1 year. And the biggest mistake that I get is clients not being quick with their decision to incorporate, signing a lease, then kind of stepping back and saying, we're not ready yet, but having this lease, then 5-6 months later saying, okay, we're ready to go now, and we've got this lease. the lease will be invalid because at that point it would have only been valid for another 6 months. And the government will come back to you to say, re-sign the lease so we can see at least a minimum of a 12-month period from the date of registration. Okay, so please, when you are deciding to incorporate, make sure that your lease is at the point of the incorporation and that you're not signing it, waiting, haven't pushed forward with your decision making. It has to all come like that. I hope you can't see me click my fingers, but it has to be quick, okay? You can't wait around. In addition to that, you've got to realize that the type of property that you choose has to match the type of legal entity and business scope that you are indicating, okay? So first of all, residence buildings do not count. You cannot incorporate an entity in a residential building. So for every single property in China, the landlord, the owner of the property has registered that property and the type of property it is with the real estate bureau. So when you get the floor plans and the ownership certificate, it will indicate what type of property it has been designated. Residential does not work for any type of entity that is going to be set up. If you are going to be manufacturing or trading and you're going to keep stock of inventory, then you have to be in a factory or a warehouse. If you are trading or providing service, then you need to be in a commercially designated property. If you are doing retail, you need to show the lease agreement of a retail shop that's been designated as retail, okay? I hope this all makes common sense because in most other jurisdictions around the world, or Hong Kong, for example, you can actually incorporate your company in a residential apartment or house. It is not like that in China. So the type of property has to match the business scope that you are creating for your company. Another thing to remember, and this obviously relates to the topic about the virtual office, is that one company is registered in one registered office space. What does that mean? It means that if you have a supplier or you have a third-party provider, or let's say you have Woodburn and you say, Christina, I don't really need an office space. Could I use your address? The answer will be no, because my company is registered in one space that is designated and registered with the real estate bureau, and no other company can be registered in that space. You may have suppliers who are offering you spaces and saying, we have space, why don't you put your team of people here? It'll make it so much easier, they'll be on site, etc. That is only possible if your supplier owns the property and is willing to sublease legally, is also then willing to create a separate office room number compared to theirs. So for example, room 7th floor office space 701 is turning into 701A and 701B, okay? But your landlord has to properly sublease that and make sure there are two entrances to that space, okay? So it does get very, very complicated. Ultimately, what you need to realize is that when you are choosing a registered office address, registered office space, you need to have a room with 4 walls, okay? Now, biggest issue that I see is what happens if you suddenly realize that the location you have originally chosen, let's say Shanghai, is not the right location for your business, and actually you should be in Beijing. So I've had this now with a couple of clients, and I'll give you them as case studies so you can understand a little bit. So I have one client in Shenzhen that has an office there with a team of merchandisers, because in history, all of their suppliers are located in Shenzhen. So they wanted to have a team of their own people doing quality control, as well as finding and maintaining the relationships with new suppliers and existing suppliers. However, now the company is realizing that they would like to sell in the Chinese market, and they need to be in a more image-worthy location compared to Shenzhen. For example, Shanghai, where you see all the big brands, you see all the retail shops, where in the vicinity of Shanghai, you know, like Hangzhou, where Alibaba is based and hence where you have Tmall, it's in the surrounding areas, right? So you are in the location where you have the e-commerce providers, you've got the retail facilities, etc. They're realizing they have to kind of upgrade their image and be there. So what their option is to maintain the Shenzhen company and open up a branch facility in Shanghai. But the first thing they will have to do is look at their business scope to make sure that they have the ability to do domestic sales, okay? Because they might not have added that in their business scope back in the day, and they have to add it in before they establish that branch, because the branch office will have the same business scope as that head office in China. Or another client of mine who is based in Inner Mongolia, they are there, again, for sourcing reasons, for merchandising reasons. And they now want to sell in the Chinese market, and they also realize that Shanghai is the place that they have to go. So the option really is to set up this branch, to set up this subsidiary of the original entity you have established. That will be the best option for you. Now, there are many pros and cons to that, because you might say, I actually really don't need this whole hot company any longer. I want to centralize everything in one entity. I want to liquidate that company and get rid of the employees. Well, then you're liquidating the whole hot company and you're setting up a brand new entity in Shanghai, which fortunately both those processes can go in parallel, okay? But there are a lot of issues around this. There's a lot of time spent, energy spent, decision-making spent if you do want to change cities, or simply if you do want to expand, okay? So keep in mind and talk to a local market entry advisor on what options you have to make sure you're optimizing your structure in China. Now, before I start on the tax consequences, I want to go a little bit back to the virtual office scenario. So for those of you that are old China hands, you may know that with business centers, some of them offer options where they offer you a solution called the registered office address only solution, which you have to find a business center that has, first of all, the space and availability to offer you that service. What that service basically means is that business centers may have companies that do not register their entities in China, but have people who want to work in a co-working facility. So the room that they are renting out actually has never been registered with the real estate bureau because they don't have an entity in China, which means it's available. So the business centers, in order to obtain more funds and more revenue, is they offer this solution to companies who are looking to register their companies but don't actually physically need a space. And they provide then that space, which is going to be registered with the real estate bureau under your new company name. And you can use it, you simply don't use it, right? But you use it purely for the registered office address for the government process, and that is indicated within your business license. Now, the advantage of this is that if there are any random government inspections, the business centers have receptionists at the front entrance who know how to handle those situations, okay? The downside to it is that if you do need space, you know, then that might not be a solution for you. But it is a much cheaper option. And it's a loophole. I don't want to say it's illegal. It's a loophole that the business centers have discovered and are profiting from. Okay, so I do want to highlight that as a potential solution for people that are not necessarily looking to actually utilize a physical space. Now let's start off with the tax consequences of selecting your location in China. So Each city in China is made up of districts. When you choose an office space, remember, you are registering your company in that city, but you are registering your tax status within the district of that city. Okay, I'm just going to repeat that again, and I'm going to choose the next slide to highlight this on. This is Shanghai. You can see all the big districts: Pudong, Fengxian, Jinshan, Songjiang, Qingpu, Jiading, Baoshan, Minhang. And then you'll see the little yellow ones, right? Which you'll see Shanghai Central. Those little ones are the CBD districts, where you have Huangpu, Shuhui, Channing, Jing'an, Putuo, Jiabei, Hongkou, and Yangpu. So you are registering your company with the Administration of Industry and Commerce of Shanghai, but your tax registration is in the district of where your registered office address is located. Okay, so if you decide that your registered office address, I'm going to use Huangpu because that's where I am, is in Huangpu district, then you are going to be negotiating and handling all of your taxes in Huangpu district. Now, what I want all of you to understand from a tax perspective is that in every district, there is a tax office, and on an annual basis, there is a competition about how much tax revenue is earned per district. So you can imagine that the tax bureaus do not want to lose you as a client. Okay, which means, hold on, that's the next slide, which means that if you decide you want to move from Huangpu district, which is number 1, to Xuhui district, which is number 2, you will have to go through a tax closure audit with your Huangpu district tax office, which can take between 8 to 12 weeks to accomplish, and then reopen with your Xuhui tax bureau, Xuhui district tax office. For that period where you're doing this closure audit, it means that you cannot actually purchase VAT invoices. All of your tax liabilities are kind of halted, okay? Because you're in this limbo period, and ultimately it can halt your business because you can't issue invoices. All right, I'm going to touch on this again because this is where it is so critical. All right, and I'm going to refer it to point 3, but I want to highlight through this slide, every city is made up of internal districts, and you are going to register with your district tax office. Okay, now tax incentives may be offered by state, local, or district governments. Okay, this is fabulous. I told you the case study of this client of mine in Shenzhen, thinking about setting up in Qianhai district in Shenzhen, where they're offering preferential tax policies for profits tax, as well as individual income tax. And she loved it, right? But you've got to make sure that it is a guarantee that you are going to get those tax policies when you become profitable. So this is an issue, right? You're setting up your company today. You might not become profitable until 3, 4, 5 years down the line, because in that interim, you're setting up repatriation strategies to get your money out of China, right? So do these tax incentives really apply for you or apply to you, considering how you want to optimize your tax situation in your Chinese company? Okay, please think about this very carefully. Don't just think about that moment in time of setting up. You're not profitable. So are you really going to take advantage of any of these incentives? And then the next question you have to ask yourself is, when will you be profitable? When will you be profitable? All right, you've got to ask yourself that, and that's where your budget comes into play and where it becomes then vital. Okay, now I am going to use an example here, and I apologize that the content on this is a little bit small for you to read. But what I want to highlight here is that in Shanghai, there is an actual building, which you can see on the left. It's called the Australia House. It was funded and subsidized by the Australian government, and within that building houses the Australian Chamber of Commerce. But the rest of the building is actually a property development that is managed by the Ankin Group, and it is a type of business center, the whole building, where there's a co-working facility and there are also individual office spaces available. Now, what is really interesting about this building is that this building alone has preferential tax policies for foreign investors, which I've never seen anywhere else in China, that a building has specific preferential policies. Okay, usually you'll get, like I said earlier, state, local, and district, but to have a specific building having benefits. Now, unfortunately, it's really very small for you to read, but I wanted to show here the tax benefits of being in this building, which is that if your tax payable is between 0 and 5 million renminbi, you will get 50% refunded by the Chunning district government on VAT, on corporate income tax, and 30% refund for each each employee's individual income tax, which is unheard of. It's absolutely amazing. And the industries that are eligible are fund management, retail, e-commerce, lifestyle type organizations, AI organizations, fashion design, etc. But what I would recommend is that any company that's interested to go into the Australia House, that's the discussion point with the Ankin Group, which is the property developer, to see that if you're not in those eligible industries, whether it still apply to you. Now, also, what is absolutely amazing about this building, and I'm not getting referral fees, I just want to highlight that, but I do have a client that is housed there, is that my client who set up this entity, he currently has no employees. And he has been able, without getting a room with 4 walls, which would obviously cost more, he's been able to register his entity through a working space desk, which again is unheard of. And I'm not sure, I'm not familiar whether WeWork, which is another type of co-working space, offers that type of a solution. That has to be checked. But I do know it has worked because I've now gone through that experience in 2020 where their desk is the physical space where the company is registered, which is phenomenal. He is paying 2,000, I think, I don't want to make a mistake, but I think it's like 2,800 renminbi per month on rent. Okay, it's the lowest so far in Shanghai. But again, this all relates to the fact whether you need space or you don't need space. But the issue is he's registered his company in Chunning district. He's registered it in his building. He will be able to get tax benefits at the point of where he is. He's got actual revenue and income and he's transacting. When he gets his first employee, he will also have great benefits for that employee. What an incentive to get people to work for you. Okay, but it means that you are stuck to that building, quite frankly. So you have to look at not only the short-term as well as the long-term plan of being in that building. But I just want to highlight this as a case study of tax benefits. And you know, this is all backed by the Australian Chamber of Commerce. So you know that it is secure, it's authentic. One other case study I want to highlight is of a company that was a company of mine that was pushed to actually set up in Wuxi in a specific zone by the corporation with the Wuxi government, as well as with its clients that are going to be establishing there. And this zone is actually in the process of being constructed, but the company had to be established prior in order to be able to sign an MOU deal for this cooperation. And the property developer very kindly issued a notice to my client to state that it is a virtual office that is supported by the local economic zone as well as the Wuxi government, that there will be no payment in rental fee, and it was chopped by the property developer. So the client was very secure in establishing his business and being in that location because he has this letter now to show to the bank, to show to whomever, in case a government officer or office approaches them to say, you're not in a legal space, you're in a virtual office space. Okay, so you can get these letters and you just have to negotiate on that. Other tax considerations are also if you are in high new tech enterprises. So the advantage of being designated as an HNTE, it means that you automatically get a reduction in your corporate income tax from 25% to 15%. Okay, I am going to be doing a webinar at the end of this month all about taxes and managing your taxes. So please join that because quite frankly, with the beneficial policies for SMEs, you can get much less than 15%, especially in your startup phase where you will be considered an SME. So be aware of that. But there are criteria that you have to abide by in order to get this 15% corporate income tax rate. And it all surrounds IP, it surrounds the types of employees you're hiring, and it also surrounds the research and development, okay? You guys can, if you have any questions about this specifically, don't hesitate to reach out and I'll explain it to you in more detail. These are the types of companies that can obtain the HNTE credential or the approval, okay? So, should you wish to change your office space and move to another district in the future, you've got to understand the tax consequences and you have to be able to plan for that appropriately, okay? Because it will cause a halt in your business in terms of being able to purchase VAT invoices and issue VAT invoices, because you'll have to go through this tax closure audit with a tax bureau, and no tax bureau wants to lose their clients, so you, to other districts, okay? So they could potentially make your life a little bit difficult. So there has to be planning on this. You have to make sure that you look at all of your tax liabilities and that it is clear and settled before you actually initiate this change. Action plan. Your first decision today, because I can see that most of you that are on here are looking to establish an entity in China, is, are you going to start off in a business center or are you going to start off in an actual physical operational space? There's no right or wrong here, but that is a debate that will probably go through your mind. Because if you are ready to kick off tomorrow and you cannot look at physical spaces and you want to have time to look at that, then the best thing that I can recommend you to do is choose, obviously, the province and the city, but look in depth at the districts to see where you actually want to be located, not just now, but also for the long term. You don't want to go through this tax closure audit, okay? So that if you, let's say, let me go back to this map, and I'll use Woodburn as an example. I have been in Huangpu district since 2006, and I've never left it, and I never plan on leaving it. I do not want to move out of there because I don't want to go through a closure audit, which means that for a period of 3 months, I can't issue invoices, VAT invoices to my clients who I normally invoice monthly in China, and I don't get then the revenue that I need to operate my entity. So in my mindset, Huangpu is it for me. I'm not moving out. I'm not going through that dilemma of halting my business for 3 months. I won't take that risk. So it's very important from the start to really know which district you want to be in, and make that your home. Okay, further action plans. The mantra of most real estate agents is, or even most market entry advisors, is location, location, location. It is critical. Okay, you want to be in the right location, and you want to make a right decision on that. You need to determine your rental budget, and that's why it's so critical to create a budget. Okay, you need to understand what you want to spend. Now, attached to that, you also need to know what are real estate prices, or sorry, rental prices. Shanghai is super expensive considering what you get. The quality of the buildings in China are horrendous. Okay, one office that I was in, I remember the gummy, you know, the rubber that's around the windows, it had a hole in it. So I had to have 2 heaters in my office during winter time just to stay warm. Right? That's how horrendous it is, and don't rely on the management team. But you got to understand how much you're willing to pay for what you're going to get. Location will affect your operation. It will affect your total sales. It will affect talent acquisition and retention. It will affect the operational side of your business. And please, I mean, as an action plan, I mean, I can't emphasize this more. And so many people aren't aware of the legal and tax considerations. And then they get themselves into a mess. I'm pretty sure that if you guys hadn't attended this webinar, you would never have known about the legal and tax requirements of having an office and what it would mean for your future operation. Please let me know, because you know, it helps me when I'm creating my webinars, but I'm pretty sure you would never have known any of this. All right, so you've got to make that a key consideration. Please don't rush to make your decision. I mean, this client of mine in Shenzhen, she's got her head on her shoulders. She's actually postponed the incorporation by 2 months because she's waiting for this bubble. I don't know if you guys are all aware of this, but there's a bubble created between Hong Kong and Singapore now, where if you travel between those 2 jurisdictions, you don't have to do quarantine. And China and Hong Kong are in those discussions as well to create that bubble between Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Guangzhou. And apparently I read even this week that, yeah, people who are coming from mainland China don't have to do the quarantine. Don't take my word for that, please. But I did read something about that this week in the news, in the South China Morning Post. But yeah, she's waiting for that bubble to be created so that she can go over, take away the quarantine, and visit actual real estate places, because for her, a business center is really not an option, and she doesn't want to have to move people at a later stage, and she's not in a rush. So don't rush to make your decision. If you are in a rush though, then do start off with a business center, okay? Please talk to real estate agents, please, okay? They are the experts in this field. They can tell you what are the rental rates. They can tell you how to negotiate. You know, one of the things that I did strategically was I actually, in 2006, 2007, when I moved, I actually leased out a larger space, was able to fix the rental amount for 6 years, fixed the increased rate for the remaining 4 years. I signed a 10-year contract because I knew that in those 10 years, I either would hit that capacity or just be under that capacity of workstations in that office space. But I then had a budget for 10 years for my rental amount, which was brilliant. And I didn't have to worry about that. And then obviously, please meet with corporate service providers and legal professionals to help you negotiate those lease agreements, and then talk to you about those legal and tax considerations that might be specific to you, okay? So that's your action plan. Business center versus operational office, and then doing this location analysis and just simply talking to people about it. Please tell me, what are your takeaways from today? I haven't involved you guys so much. I apologize. So Julie very kindly said she had no idea about the legal and tax consequences. So Julie, I hope that's your biggest takeaway. Do write to me. what were your biggest takeaways for today? Most of you have been very silent today. But that's what I want to hear. What have you learned? It's always an advantage for everybody to hear what others have learned when talking about location. So Julie said, research where is the right place to be. Absolutely, Julie. Biggest takeaway is probably that. I'm going to keep going, but please do type to me, guys. I want to know what you've learned. So how can I help you? And compared to my previous 2 webinars, I've added 1 item, which is the first one. If you need to have introductions to real estate agents or business centers, to have a question on that, to meet people and to be able to have these types of discussions and to understand the location analysis, please let me know. But other than that, I'm also happy to go through the advisory side of the legal and tax consequences. And then definitely think about, all these other services that I've highlighted in the previous 2 days. I don't want to be a parrot and repeat myself, but if people do have questions about our services, let me know, okay? And if you guys want to set up a 15-minute game plan session to talk about this, please do let me know as well. I'm happy to jump on a call for 15-20 minutes and talk about what you need to know in terms of this topic. I'm struggling to type here. 1 second. I'm going to put in the link. And you guys can then actually make an appointment directly in my diary. If you want to add me on WeChat, I'm going to give you my WeChat ID if you haven't done that already. I also have a community on WeChat if you guys want to join that. I'm going to give you my email address. And then don't forget to link up with me on LinkedIn because I do post quite a bit on there as well. So let's ask, there are a few questions that popped in. So Nathan was asking, I have a question. How do you enter a lease if your company isn't set up? Very good question, Nathan. You sign the lease. So this is where it gets a bit tedious. You sign the first lease where you would have negotiated all the terms and conditions with your parent company, because the deposit will have to be paid from the parent company because you won't have an entity yet. Okay, I'm going to let that sink in, because probably if you're creating your budget, you're all making the assumption that payments will be made out of the Chinese bank account. But initially, there will be a few things that have to be paid locally in China from your shareholding entity. Okay, and one of those will be the deposit, and probably the first couple months rent. Then, when you do the name approval process of your company, as well as the online declaration, you need approval for those 2 steps. At which point, you change the lease agreement to go under the company name. The lease agreement in original, together with the floor plan and the ownership certificate of your landlord, will be submitted as documents when we the submission at the Administration of Ministry of Commerce with the original documentation. So the first lease is the most critical because you're negotiating all the terms and conditions. That lease will then be changed under your Chinese company name. It will change in terms of the terms and conditions of that lease. Any other questions? Rod was just saying that virtual office is a no-go. Definitely the Australia house looks attractive as an option. Are there any other questions? You guys have all been relatively silent. Nathan, appreciate you reaching out on that. No? Well, I'm going to stay on. So if you're taking your time typing, don't worry. Again, if you want to set up a 15-minute game plan session, no strings attached, please do. The links, the WeChat ID, email is all in there. And then last but not least, get ready. We've got 2 more days to go, okay? So tomorrow we're going to be talking about shareholder, because I have gotten a lot of questions on that, although that's not an individual topic, but I'll touch on it tomorrow, as well as appointing the individual people in the China corporate structure. And then on Friday, we'll be talking about corporate bank accounts, okay? I'm hoping that everybody is seeing that with each of these individual webinars, they're all linked together, right? In terms of creating that business plan and creating that budget. So I'm hoping that everybody understands that it's all linked together, okay? And you do need to brainstorm on that. And then if you want to join our WeChat China Roadmap community, connect with us. What you need to do is connect with me first. So my ID is in the chat box. And then just write China Roadmap, and I will then insert you guys into the community. All right. And that's it for today's session. So if you haven't signed up for the previous session, for the next 2 sessions, you can do that at woodburnglobal.com/events. I will be staying on for another 5 minutes or so in case more questions pop in. But in the meantime, I will stop the recording, and a copy of, the recording link will be sent to everybody. I will not be distributing to the slides to people though. We've had misuse of that in the past, but everybody will be getting a link to the webinar recording. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Have a great evening, as well as a great afternoon, and goodbye.